Hi, my name is Dave Wilton. I'm going to show you the simplest, easiest, trouble-free way to convert your Model A to hydraulic brakes. We're going to start with the front backing plate. This backing plate has not been altered for the Model A. As you can see, this is a Model A spindle, and the backing plate doesn't fit. So what we're going to do is put this adapter ring on the backing plate, elongate the holes, then the backing plate, when completed, will fit the Model A spindle. The holes all line up and it's a bolt-on. This adapter is thinner than the backing plate so that when you tighten it up, it acts, the backing plate is sandwiched between the adapter ring and the spindle. When I do them here, I tack weld them, but that's not necessary. On the spindle, sometimes there's a grease retainer ring here for your Model A. That must be removed, and then the adapter ring for the seal and the bearing spacer slides on here thusly. That's it for the front. That's how simple it is. Here's a front brake assembly assembled with the shoes, the wheel cylinder, and a return spring for your Model A. The unusual thing about this set of Wagner brake setup is that the cylinder is a step cylinder and the large part always faces forward. The other thing that is different is that since it's a fixed anchor brake, you don't have a secondary and primary brake shoe. Both segments should be the same length to work properly. What you've got to be careful of is in buying reproduction springs or some spring on the market that is not the correct length. The springs I use are the correct length and tension. After you assemble the assembly, before you put it on the car, always try it in your brake drum to make sure it fits. And that's that for the front. This is the rear brake setup. The bolt pattern on the rear backing plate fits the Model A pattern, but there is a clearance problem. The clearance problem falls in the shock tower area. So what I do is I make a hole here that's rectangular shaped. I put a cover over it and weld it in place. The other thing that you have to modify on the backing plate is the thickness of this lip. You've got to take 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch off, else it will rub on this area of the brake drum. The brake drum also has to be machined off. You have to machine this area off 1/8 of an inch to 3/16, else it will rub on this area of the backing plate. This backing plate's been modified in both areas. It's been narrowed here. It's had this hole cut out to clear the shock tower. Now here's an assembly almost done. Unlike the front brake assemblies, it makes a difference which way the spring goes in, and I'll show you why. The rear shoe always uses a long pin. The front shoe always uses a short pin. If you don't put the spring in properly, and in this case the hook goes up on the long pin end, when you put the lever on, as you can see, it sits up here about 3/16 of an inch. It will cock this up like this, and you're trying to figure out why this sticks out of here when it's supposed to be snug like that. So by putting it in there correct, the link, as you can see, rides right on the brake shoe. When you install this, it's in the proper position and away. If you're going to do one of these, the one thing you want to do is make sure that it goes inside the drum before you put on the linkage, because the linkage can change the setting. That fits fine. So Now it's okay to install the linkage thusly. Now then there's a retainer, a horseshoe clip that goes here. Now there's two different kinds of long springs. There's a long spring and a shorter long spring. The long one like this goes in, takes a waffle type spring washer, a standard washer, and then you just simply push the clip into place. And that's all there is to the rear. Okay, this is a continuation of the rear backing plate and the modification to the rear axle housing that needs to be made. Prior, I discussed the two modifications to the backing plate. Now we're going to go to the rear end housing. The shock tower. A lot of guys cut them off. Not necessary. All you need to do is to grind a relief in the shock tower like I have here. It's about a 1/16 of an inch deep. It encompasses half the shock tower and is at a 45-degree angle so that the line can come in here like this and go into the wheel cylinder. And this is how it's done if this goes the way it's supposed to. And as you can see, the line clears the shock tower in this area. Again, I'll take this apart again and show you the groove again so you fully understand what I'm talking about. The other thing is you're going to notice that the bleed screw is extremely close to the shock absorber mount. When you bleed the brakes, if you use silicone fluid will not eat the paint. If you use common hydraulic brake fluid, it'll eat the paint. So the trick is to simply take your garden hose, turn it on, hold it here and let the garden hose run water while you bleed the brakes, and it won't do any damage to the paint. And besides that, when the fluid hits the ground, the water takes and changes it into a soapy-like substance and it just goes away, so you don't have a mess to clean up. Okay, let me pull this apart again. Here's the groove right here on this side. I groove both sides of this because sometimes I use a right-hand cylinder, sometimes I use a left-hand cylinder, so that's why it's done on both sides for those of you that notice I go from one side to the other. This is my method for installing the master cylinder on the Model A transmission. It's simple and easy. There's no linkage here at all except for the push rod and the connecting link. The bracket is welded to your current brake pedal, and I also include a return spring kit. The master cylinder sits right next to the battery, and the battery box sits right in this area here, and that's why there's a 90-degree fitting on the stoplight switch just to clear the battery box. This line, it's a single line system. This line goes to a T, which goes to the rear and front brakes. And we'll show you the line setup in just a few takes. This is the method I use to install a master cylinder on a car that does not have a Model A transmission. I build a special battery box that takes the place of the other battery box. The master cylinder is located here. It has a bell crank, and the stock pedal is retained and hooked up to the clevis and this Heinz joint. The only modification to the frame is you have to drill a one hole. You don't have to, but you should drill a hole here for a fourth bolt. And that's all there is to the remote master cylinder setup for using a non-Model A transmission. This is what I call a front line kit. The brake hose comes from the right front wheel cylinder, goes into a bracket that's bolted to the frame. This line is hooked to the hose. It comes over to a fitting, and the fitting goes into another hose from the left front wheel cylinder. You have a bolt and a copper gasket, another copper gasket, and this just screws right into the brake hose going to the left front wheel. It also has a bracket that's bolted to the frame to hold it, and is held in place with the horseshoe clip. The line going back to the master cylinder screws into here. And there's 3 holes in the frame where you can bolt these Adele aircraft clamps to hold the line in place, and then we'll talk about this end of the line in just a minute. This is what I call a rear line kit. I have it on a rear end by itself so it's easier to see. The line comes out of the right rear wheel cylinder, comes down the radius rod, goes underneath the torque tube, and hooks to a T here. The left line comes out of the left wheel cylinder, comes down the radius rod, hooks into the same T. You have to drill holes in each radius rod, and I tap them, and I use a 12-24 screw, and again I use these aircraft Adele clamps to hold the line in place. Do it on the right side, and I do it on the left side, and I also attach the brass fitting to the radius rod with a 12-24 screw. When you're doing the brake job and you have the rear vacuum plates off the Model A, the only thing holding the radius rods to the car is this single bolt. So it's easy to undo that one bolt, put these out on the bench to drill and to tap. A flex hose attaches here at the brass fitting and goes up to a clamp that holds it to the frame. You have to drill one hole in the center cross member, 1/4 inch for this. That's the only other modification of the frame you're going to make. And like on the front, this is a line from the front brake, and it's going to attach to this hose the same as the left front and the right front went together. The bolt, the 2 copper gaskets into the line, and this is attached to the frame through this angle bracket. And that's all there is to the rear brake line kit and the front brake line kit where they join together. Next, I'm going to show you how this attaches to the master cylinder. Okay, we've shown you the front line kit, how it comes back to the center cross member. I showed you the rear line kit and how it joins the front line kit here at the center cross member. This is how we join the master cylinder to the rest of the setup. This flex hose is for the rear end because the rear end is always moving. This flex hose is for the engine because the engine is always moving. It simply comes out of the master cylinder, goes to a flex hose, and into the T-junction for the rear end and the front end join. And that's how simple the front master cylinder kit is. When putting hydraulic brakes on Model A's or any car that use wire wheels, there's an area of neglect that everybody forgets about, and the people that are going to watch this will probably say, well, I've run mine 30 years and never had no trouble. Well, maybe they do and maybe they don't. But a wire wheel has no support in this area. The support for this area was built into the brake drums from 28 to 35. If you look at any car with mechanical drums, 28 to 35, you'll see that the center part is raised up about 3/16 of an inch. If you put this on a hydraulic hub and drum, there's a gap right in this area of about 3/16. So I've come up with what I call a spacer ring. It goes right in here, and you can epoxy it to the wheel, or you can epoxy it to the drum. Doesn't make any difference. It goes here, the wire wheel goes on, and you've got the support for your wire wheel. There's another problem if you use the new cast drums and wire wheels. The wire wheel on the new cast drum touches in this area before it touches in this area. So I've come up with what I call an adapter ring. It does two things at the same time. The first thing it does is space the wire wheel out from the drum roughly 100 thousandths, so you got clearance here. The second thing is it has a ring for built-in support for the center of the wire wheel. So you use what I call a wire wheel adapter on the new cast drums, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's the one that's on the outside mount or on the inside mount. Both of them require this with a wire wheel. The inside mount drum, when you put a hub on it, it has the same problem. The wire wheel touches in this area before it touches the hub in this area. On the original equipment drum, you need what I call a spacer ring to give that support for the wire wheel. Now there's other of you that's going to be telling that they run them 30 years without no trouble, and that might be true, but you just never know what's going to happen. Hi, Dave again. Just a quick review of what we've done so far. I showed you the front backing plates and the modifications to the plate to mount it on the Model A spindle. Showed you the rear backing plates and the machine work and the modifications necessary for it to mount on the Model A rear end. Showed you the little knots that you've got to grind into the shock tower on the Model A rear end. Showed you a mock-up of the front brake line kit. Showed you a mock-up of the rear brake line kit on the rear end. Showed you a mock-up of the transmission master cylinder mount brake line kit to mount it to the front and rear at the junction of that T. And now the next thing I'm going to do is show you a chassis that's done and show you some little minor things that you need to know when putting it together. When you put hydraulic brakes on a Model A, the hydraulic brake drum uses a different bearing and seal than the Model A, therefore you have to change it. When you're hooking up your emergency brake, remember I cautioned about putting the spring in the correct position to keep this lever from being popped out. The cable hooks here, and it has a spring for tension and a horseshoe type keeper to hold it in place. When you put this in place, you only put enough tension on this spring to put tension against here. You don't put a whole great deal, otherwise your cable will bubble out like this. So all you do is just put enough tension on it to have tension, not very much. And the other end of the emergency brake cable I've done this way, and it attaches in the standard position of your regular emergency brake cross shaft. You don't change anything there. This just slips on and you drop a cotter key into it. Okay, we're going to walk around this chassis, and I'm going to show you how the brake lines attach to the frame and where they go. I told you it goes from the right front hose to the frame to a bracket, The crossover line comes underneath the car, hooks into a bracket here from the left front hose. From this angle you can see that the brass fitting is here. The line that goes to the master cylinder attaches to that brace fitting here, comes up and hooks into the bracket for the rear hose here. From here it goes down to the master cylinder. The rear brake lines go from the right rear up the radius rod to the T, from the left rear up the radius rod to the T, and the hose connects it to the line that comes from the left front. That's about all there is to it. It's just that simple.